Two of the world's biggest economies, locked in a fierce trade battle for years, suddenly hit the brakes. Factories were shutting down. Prices were going crazy. Tensions were rising not just between governments, but between people too. And just when it felt like things were spinning out of control, they paused. Yes, the US and China have signed a new trade deal. But here's the real question. Who actually won? Was it America, with its demands and pressure? Or China, who stood strong and never completely backed down? Let's take you inside this massive economic truce. We'll look at what the deal really says, who is benefiting right now, and why this calm might not last. By the end, you'll know exactly what's going on, without all the complicated words or confusing political talk. So sit back. Because this is the real story. The fight between the US and China didn't just start last week. This trade war has been building for years. It began with tariffs, extra taxes on goods shipped between the two countries. America said China wasn't playing fair. China said America was trying to block its growth. Neither side was backing down. Then came 2024. Things got worse. Tariffs hit 120% on many items. That meant if a product usually cost $100, now it cost $220 just to bring it across the border. This hurt businesses on both sides. Prices went up for American shoppers. Chinese factories lost customers. It felt like everyone was losing. But then, something changed. In early 2025, after months of behind-the-scenes talks, the two countries agreed to a 90-day truce. Tariffs would drop, some of them by more than half. New rules were put on hold. Both governments promised to talk things through before going back to war. And that's where the deal comes in. Signed quietly, but with huge effects. The first signs of change were easy to spot. In the US, big companies like Walmart, Target, and Best Buy jumped into action. These stores rely heavily on Chinese-made products, everything from electronics to toys to clothes. With tariffs lowered, they rushed to place new orders before prices could rise again. Imagine this. Warehouses filling up with smart TVs, holiday lights, kitchen blenders, and laptops, all brought in at lower costs. These companies knew this could be their last window to stock up before the next possible tariff hike. Even small businesses started moving again. Some importers who had stopped working with China because it was too expensive were now picking up the phone again. One small electronics distributor in Los Angeles told a local reporter, "We're taking the risk. It may not last, but this truce gives us a little breathing room." That's how important this deal is. It's not just about trade, it's about confidence. But what about China? On the other side of the world, in places like Guangdong and Zhejiang, factories that had been quiet for months were suddenly buzzing again. Orders started flowing in. Workers were called back. Production lines that were nearly shut down in 2024 began spinning again in early 2025. Chinese trade officials noticed it right away. Export activity in coastal regions ticked up. Cargo ships leaving for California and Texas were filling up again. Even the logistics companies were excited. More boxes, more bookings, more business. One of the biggest winners? E-commerce platforms. Sites like Temu, Shein, and Alibaba got a huge boost. These companies had been crushed when the US raised tariffs on low-cost goods in 2024. Shipping delays got worse. Prices went up. Customers complained. But now, with tariffs on small shipments cut from 120% to 54%, these platforms are roaring back. US shoppers are seeing faster deliveries. Some Temu packages are arriving in just 6 to 8 days again. For Gen Z and millennials who love cheap online shopping, that's great news. Still, not everyone is happy. American manufacturers, especially in steel, textiles, and electronics, are worried. They say this new deal makes it harder for them to compete with cheap Chinese goods. Labor unions are upset too. They feel the government gave in too easily without fixing the core problems, like unfair subsidies or weak labor rules in China. Some U.S. lawmakers have already spoken out. They're warning President Biden not to go soft in future talks. "Don't forget," one senator said, "cheap goods are nice, but American jobs matter more." And this is where things get tricky. Because while the deal looks like peace, it might just be a pause. Many companies aren't taking any chances. They're using the truce to buy time. Some are following a China+1 strategy, keeping part of their business in China, but also building new factories in places like Vietnam, India, Indonesia, and Mexico. That way, if things go bad again, they're not stuck. These new supply chains are growing fast. Governments in those countries are offering tax deals and land to attract foreign companies. Labor is cheap, and global firms are eager to avoid being caught in another US-China crossfire. Meanwhile, the shipping industry is finally breathing again. Ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles are reporting higher cargo volumes. Container prices are stabilizing. Freight companies are hiring more drivers and updating delivery schedules. For the first time in years, the US-China trade route feels normal-ish. And Wall Street? It's watching everything very closely. When news of the deal broke, stocks jumped, especially in tech and retail. Companies that depend on Chinese production, like Apple, Boeing, and big auto brands, saw their shares rise. Boeing, in particular, benefited big. Why? Because China lifted its ban on buying American aircraft. That's huge for a company that had been locked out of one of its biggest markets. Even shipping and logistics stocks are doing well, with better-than-expected earnings predicted for the next quarter. But beneath all this excitement, there's still uncertainty. This deal may have calmed things down, but it hasn't solved the real problems. Let's be honest. The US and China still don't trust each other. They still argue about technology, intellectual property, and national security. American officials say Chinese companies copy US ideas and then use government help to beat their competition. That's why, for years, the US has blocked companies like Huawei and TikTok and added rules to stop tech sharing. China, on the other hand, says the US is just scared of competition, scared of losing power. Chinese leaders believe it's unfair. They say they have every right to grow their own industries and catch up with the West. So even if this new deal lowers some tariffs and brings back trade, it doesn't mean the two sides actually agree on anything deeper. That's why experts are warning. This could be a short break, not a happy ending. Still, one area where there might be progress is tech. This trade deal could help American chip makers. Over the last few years, US companies like Intel, Qualcomm, and Nvidia have struggled to sell to Chinese clients because of security rules. China was seen as a risk. But now, with this new pause, there's a chance some chip sales might return, at least for non-sensitive technologies. That means chips used in cars, smartphones, or simple devices, not military or AI projects. And for companies that lost millions during the peak of the trade war, that's a big relief. At the same time, China isn't sitting still. They're trying to become self-sufficient in microchips and artificial intelligence. In fact, some are calling this a tech Cold War. Two superpowers racing to outdo each other while cutting each other off. This new deal doesn't end that, but it might slow it down for now. Meanwhile, global businesses are just trying to survive. Companies like Tesla, Ford, GM, Apple, and Nike all have huge factories in China. These aren't just assembly lines. They're part of a massive ecosystem of suppliers, workers, engineers, and designers. Moving that to another country takes years. That's why these companies were desperate for this pause. Many had delayed new investments. Some even froze hiring in China. But now, with tariffs easing, they're hoping things might stabilize, at least for the short term. Even big business groups like the US Chamber of Commerce and the National Retail Federation have spoken out. They praised the truce and begged both governments to find long-term solutions. They don't want a short break. They want peace. Because honestly, no business wants to get caught in a political fight they can't control. Now, here's something interesting. Some experts believe this deal might also help improve the bigger relationship between the US and China. Because let's face it, trade isn't the only issue. There's also tension over Taiwan, the South China Sea, cybersecurity, and even spy balloons. Things have gotten so bad in recent years that many feared a real conflict could happen. Diplomats from both sides say this truce, though small, could open the door to talks on these other issues. It's like a crack in the wall, a small opening for bigger conversations. But it all depends on what happens next. Because here's the truth. We're not going back to the old days. There was a time when the US and China worked closely. Trade was flowing. Investments were booming. American students were studying in China. Chinese tourists were visiting Disneyland. Companies trusted each other. But that world is gone. Now both countries see each other more as rivals than partners. The US is working with countries like Japan, India, and South Korea to build new supply chains and reduce dependence on China. It's also investing more in domestic manufacturing, especially for things like microchips, batteries, and green energy. China, at the same time, is turning toward the global south. They're strengthening trade with Africa, Southeast Asia, Latin America, and even parts of Eastern Europe. These regions are becoming China's new friends in trade. And it's working. What we're seeing is the start of a world where supply chains are more separated, where alliances shift, and where new players can rise. And all of this began with this trade deal. But let's not forget the people. While leaders shake hands and companies move billions, average people just want peace, stability, and fair prices. In the US, shoppers are tired of rising costs. Groceries, electronics, clothes, it's all more expensive. Some blame inflation, some blame supply chains. But whatever the reason, they just want it to stop. In China, factory workers worry about jobs. When foreign companies cut orders, they suffer. Some have gone months without full pay. Others are scared their factories will move to Vietnam or India. And it's not just workers. Students want exchange programs. Families want easier visas. Travelers want fewer restrictions. People want connection, not conflict. This trade deal, small as it may be, offers a tiny bit of hope. And now it's time to ask the big question. Who really won? On the surface, it looks like a win-win. Tariffs dropped. Trade resumed. Tensions cooled. But dig deeper, and you'll see something else. The US may have gotten temporary relief for its importers and consumers. China may have protected its export economy and reopened trade links. But neither side got everything they wanted. No full tech deal, no deep reforms, no total rollback of tariffs. And that's why, at Richie Rich, we're asking you to look at the long game. Because sometimes, the winner of a deal is the one who prepares better for the next fight. Let's think about this from a strategy point of view. Both countries hit pause. But both are also getting ready for the next round. And this time, they're not just thinking about trade, they're thinking about global power. America is trying to reshape its economy. It's pushing for more made-in-the-USA products. It's investing billions in local chip factories, battery plants, and green energy. The Inflation Reduction Act and CHIPS Act weren't just economic policies. They were weapons in this silent war. And China saw that. That's why Beijing is also racing to become self-reliant. It's building its own chip industry, reducing its need for US software, and tightening rules on foreign companies. Some foreign firms like Micron even faced bans inside China. So while they shake hands now, behind the scenes, both are quietly pulling away from each other. That brings us to the next big shift. The battle for influence. China isn't only worried about US tariffs, it's also worried about getting cut off from international systems. That's why it's building trade partnerships with countries across Africa, Southeast Asia, and Latin America. They're offering loans, building railways, launching satellite deals. It's not just business, it's a strategy. Meanwhile, the US is working harder to keep its allies close. They're strengthening trade with the European Union, Japan, Australia, and India. Even supply chains are changing. Big tech firms like Apple are now moving some production to India and Vietnam. The world is slowly dividing into two trade zones. And this new deal? It might slow that down, but it won't stop it. So, who really benefits from this short pause? Well, in the short term, US consumers might see prices go down a little. Chinese exporters can breathe again and keep their factories running. Global businesses finally get some clarity after years of tension. But long term, the bigger war is still going on. Both sides are racing to become more independent, more powerful, and more influential. And in that race, there might not be one clear winner, just two giants, trying to shape the future of the world. Now let's talk about something people often forget. When two global powers clash, small countries feel the shockwaves. During the last round of tariffs, countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Mexico saw a surge in demand. Companies moved factories there to escape the trade war. But this sudden growth wasn't always stable. Many local workers faced low pay, bad conditions, and unsafe jobs. Some governments welcomed the money, but worried about becoming too dependent on big powers. Even in Europe, businesses struggle to keep up with the changing rules and rising uncertainty. So while the US and China play chess at the top, the rest of the world watches, waits, and tries not to get crushed. Here's where things get personal. Imagine you're a small business owner in the US. You've been importing cheap materials from China for years. Suddenly, tariffs hit. Prices go up. Customers complain. You can't keep up. Now this trade deal brings hope. Maybe your costs will go down. Maybe you can hire back the staff you had to let go. Or imagine you're a factory worker in Shenzhen. Orders were dropping, hours were cut. Your manager said you might lose your job. Now, there's relief. Orders return. The factory is running again. You can send money back to your family. This trade deal isn't just about politics. It's about millions of lives hanging in the balance. But don't relax just yet. This agreement is set to last 90 days. That's not long. It's like a timeout in a long, intense match. Both sides promised to talk. The US wants real changes, like protections for intellectual property, fair competition, and limits on state subsidies. China says it will cooperate, but only if it feels respected. They don't want to be bullied. They want equal treatment. And that's the real challenge. Can two powerful countries with totally different values find a path forward? Or will this deal just be another pause before the next storm? And now here's the moment we've all been waiting for. Who really won? Some will say the US won, because China came to the table, because tariffs worked, because the US economy stayed strong despite the pressure. Others will say China won, because they didn't make major concessions, because they survived the storm, because they're growing new trade partners outside the US. But here at Richie Rich, we want to say something different. Maybe nobody really won. Maybe what we're seeing is a tie. Because this trade deal isn't about victory, it's about survival. Both sides needed a break. Both sides needed peace. Both sides realized they couldn't keep fighting forever. This deal is not the end of the US-China battle. It's just a new chapter. The next moves are coming. And the world? It's watching very closely. Thanks for watching, and if you found this interesting, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe to Richie Rich for more real-world economic drama told in simple words and strong stories. And we'll see you in the next one.